The 1984 FIA Formula One World Championship was the 35th season of Formula One motor racing. It also featured the 27th Formula One World Championship for manufacturers, commenced on the 25th of March and ended on the 21st of October after 16 races. In the Drivers' Championship, McLaren teammates Alain Prost and Niki Lauda enjoyed a season-long duel. Prost won 7 races to equal Jim Clark's record from 1963, over Lauda's 5, but the Austrian eventually prevailed by half a point, the smallest margin in Formula One history. It was Lauda's third title. Reigning champion Nelson Piquet finished 5th in the championship. Brabham, Renault, and Ferrari were the expected front-runners, but it was McLaren who clinched the Constructors' Championship with a then-record margin. The combination of their talented drivers, the aerodynamics of the John Barner-designed MP42 and the experience of engine supplier Porsche with fuel economy made them almost unbeatable, winning 12 of the 16 Grands Prix. It was their first title since 1974. It is the last time that the drivers' champion did not score a pole position during the season. Only Denny Hulme managed this earlier in 1967. This is also the last Formula One season to feature 3 tyre suppliers. At the end of the 1983 season, Theodore Racing had left Formula One. No new manufacturers entered the grid for 1984. In this season there was a clear trend of manufacturers switching from naturally aspirated engines to turbocharged engines, attracted by their power output. After a handful of races, Arrows was able to upgrade from their A6 chassis with Ford Cosworth DFV V8 to the A7 with a BMW turbo engine. Osella switched their focus from the old Alfa Romeo V12 to Alfa's newer turbocharged 890T V8. Spirit Racing ran one car with a Hart turbo engine, while keeping the other powered by a Cosworth V8. The teams were careful in their approach, running the old and new cars simultaneously, before finally stepping over to turbo. The legend Ayrton Senna debuted this season, driving for Toleman Group Motorsport. Ferrari dropped Patrick Tambay in favor of Michele Alboreto, the first Italian driver signed by Enzo Ferrari since Ludovico Scarfiati in 1963. Tambay moved to Renault, with former Toleman driver Derek Warwick as his new teammate. Warwick had taken the seat of Alain Prost after he was fired and moved to McLaren. The other ex-Renault driver, Eddie Cheever, moved to Alfa Romeo, and likewise did Riccardo Patrese from Brabham. Teo Fobbi, with backing from Italian dairy company Parmalat, was promoted to be the new teammate of reigning world drivers champion Nelson Piquet, while Martin Brundle made his debut with Tyrrell. During 3 weekends when Teo Fobbi's commitments to American kart racing took precedence, his younger brother Corrado fell in for him at Brabham. Manfred Winkelhock did this for the last race of the season, after he quit the ATS team. Dutch driver Hub Rothengatter made his debut with Spirit, driving 8 races in the middle of the season, before handing the keys back to the team's first driver Mauro Boldi. For Rothengatter's home Grand Prix at Zandvoort, the Spirit 101 Hart was painted in Dutch racing orange. Mike Thackwell was on his way to clinching the 1984 European Formula 2 Championship in dominant fashion, and he got the attraction of several F1 teams. He entered a race with Ram and later won with Tyrrell. He also tested with Williams, but could not get a full-time seat. Tyrrell driver Martin Brundle crashed during practice for the Dallas Grand Prix and broke both ankles and feet. He was replaced from the next Grand Prix in Britain by Stefan Johansson. When it was announced 2 days after the Dutch Grand Prix that Ayrton Senna had signed a deal with Lotus for 1985, the Toleman team suspended him for not informing them first. Stefan Johansson took his place for the Italian Grand Prix. While qualifying for the British Grand Prix, Toleman driver Johnny Cecotto crashed heavily, breaking both of his legs, which ended his F1 driving career. Debutant Pierluigi Martini, and later Stefan Johansson, after his point-scoring effort in Italy while replacing Ayrton Senna, took over the second car. Osella entered a second car for half of the races. Formula 2 driver Joe Gardner was behind the wheel. ATS took German Formula 3 driver Gerhard Berger for 4 of the last 5 rounds of the championship, using him for both Austria and Italy when Manfred Winkelhock was unable to start the car, and the last 2 races in Europe and Portugal as their sole driver after Winkelhock had left the team. Philippe Streiff made his debut at the last race of the season, driving a third Renault car with the number 33. In the season 1984 there were some calendar changes. The race in Long Beach was replaced by the Dallas Grand Prix. It was the third in a series of overseas events, after the Canadian Grand Prix and the Detroit Grand Prix, but this put the F1 cars in the peak of the Texas summer heat. It would be the only F1 Dallas Grand Prix to be held. The South African Grand Prix was now the second race of the year instead of the season finale. That honor was given to the Portuguese Grand Prix at Estoril. The Grand Prix returned to the calendar for the first time since 1960. The Belgian Grand Prix was held at Circuit Zolder instead of Spa-Francorchamps, as part of an agreement to alternate between the venues, and moved up the schedule 1 month. In similar fashion, this year's British Grand Prix was held at Brands Hatch instead of Silverstone, and the German Grand Prix was held at the Hockenheimring instead of the Nürburgring. The French and San Marino Grand Prix switched places, with the race at Imola now going first. On the provisional calendar, the Spanish Grand Prix was scheduled to return after a 3-year absence. It was to be contested on a new street circuit in Fuengirola, but the plan did not come to fruition. Formula One tried to organize the New York City Grand Prix, but did not manage to do so for the second year in a row. The first Hungarian Grand Prix was scheduled for the 7th of October at the Nepliget Park circuit, but this was cancelled as plans for a race failed to materialize. The race was replaced by the European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. But let go now to discover a new epic, exciting and dramatic new Formula One season. Most of the Formula One seasons in the 1980s started at the sweltering tropical heat and humidity of the Jacarapagua Rio Centro Autodrome in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. A 10-day test followed by the Grand Prix often was the case. In addition to a frantic start, drivers had to deal with people running across the track with the cars bearing down on those people. Briton Derek Warwick in the French factory Renault led until an incident with Niki Lauda led to suspension failure. Frenchman Alain Prost won his first Grand Prix with McLaren at the flat and rough but fast Rio circuit. This was also Ayrton Senna's first Formula One race. He was driving for the Toleman team. Senna would prove to be the first retirement of the season when the turbo on his CYL Hart engine failed on lap 8. The South African Grand Prix was held traditionally at the fast and flowing Kyalami circuit near the high-altitude city of Johannesburg. During the race morning warm-up session, Piercarlo Ghinzani had a massive accident at the fastest corner on the track, the Jackskay sweeping uphill left-hander. As a result of the full fuel load in his Ocella, a huge fire started which completely consumed the car, though Ghinzani escaped with only minor burns to his hands. However, it was enough for him to be withdrawn from the race. Brazilian Nelson Piquet qualified on pole position, with Prost second. The latter, however, had to start from the pit lane due to problems with his car. Although the Brabhams with their highly powerful BMW turbo engines proved to be very quick on this circuit, they were very unreliable cars, mostly due to the single turbocharger of the 4-cylinder engine. In addition to Piquet retiring, his teammate Teo Fobby also retired, and Austrian Niki Lauda moved up through the field to win in his McLaren. Prost was able to carve his way from the back to second place, keeping his lead in the championship. The new Brazilian driver Ayrton Senna finished 6th in the race in his Toleman under considerable back pain, scoring his first ever World Championship point. The Belgian Grand Prix was previously held at the revised Spa-Francorchamps circuit. For this year, however, it returned to the forested Zolder circuit further north. This race saw a fighting drive from Keke Rosberg, who was driving an ill-handling Williams with a Honda engine that was unbalancing the car. Ferrari's new Italian recruit Michele Alboreto won this race from Warwick and Frenchman René Arnoux, driving the second Ferrari. Both McLarens failed to finish. This would be the last time the Formula One Belgian Grand Prix was held at Zolder. From the following year onwards it would return and stay at Spa. The San Marino Grand Prix at the Autodromo Dino Ferrari in Italy was held 1 week after the Belgian race. Defending champion Piquet, proving yet again his Brabham's superiority on light fuel loads, took pole position again. Amazingly, Senna did not qualify for the race after many problems with his uncompetitive Toleman, the only time in his F1 career in which he would fail to qualify. Piquet however retired in the race with another turbo failure, and Fobby retired on the same lap with the same problem. The race was won by Prost from his countryman Arnoux and Italian Elio De Angelis in a Renault-powered Lotus. The French Grand Prix, usually run in late June-early July, was run in May at the very fast Dijon Primois circuit. Patrick Tambay took pole in his Renault. He finished second to Niki Lauda in a McLaren that was superior to all other cars at this short circuit that was made up of long, fast corners. This would be the last time the French Grand Prix was held at the Dijon circuit. The cars were lapping in the 1 minute 2 second range during qualifying. The FIA stipulated that any lap during a Formula One event that was under a minute did not count as a completed lap. The Monaco Grand Prix was the only Grand Prix in 1984 to be run in wet conditions. Qualifying saw Briton Martin Brundle crashing his Tyrrell at the Tabac corner, as his car overturned and landed on its left side. Brundle was uninjured, and took the spare car to qualify. In the race day, the circuit was flooded by rain, as never before in Monaco since the 1930s and the 1972 event. The organizers decided to cover the tunnel section with water, because of the dramatic difference between the very wet circuit and the almost completely dry tunnel, which was in fact the road that went under the Hôtel de Paris. Prost took pole position, in front of Mansell. As the drivers went away, there was an accident at the Saint-Devote corner during the start between both the Renaults of Tambay and Warwick. Tambay injured his legs and had to be carried off the circuit on a stretcher. As the rain came down, Mansell spun his Lotus on the climb up to the Massenet corner after touching a slippery white line. Prost took the lead, although he was pacing himself in comparison to rookie drivers Ayrton Senna in a Toleman and Stefan Bellof in a naturally aspirated Tyrrell. Senna and Bellof pushed hard in an attempt to catch Prost, who was still pacing himself in conditions that were getting worse. By lap 26 of the scheduled 80 laps, the conditions became so bad that Prost signaled to Jackie Ickx, the clerk of the course, to stop the race. By lap 26, Senna was up to second place, 11 seconds behind Prost, and Bellof fourth, but on lap 29, the race was stopped. Prost parked his car on the main straight, and Senna passed him. However, the rule said that when a race was stopped, the order would be determined by what the order was on the previous lap, and Prost was leading on that lap. The race was never restarted, so Prost won with Senna second. Drivers scored half points, as the race had not completed 75% of the scheduled distance. The Canadian race at the public road Rille Villeneuve circuit on a man-made island in the St. Lawrence River's passageway through the centre of Montreal was won by Nelson Piquet, who was finally able to actually finish a race this season after chronic unreliability with his Brabham. Piquet won ahead of Lauda and Prost. The latter had to deal a misfire in his Tag Porsche turbocharged engine. The first of 2 rounds in the United States was held on an angular street circuit in the Ford and General Motors home city of Detroit, Michigan. The race was moved 2 weeks forward to late June, suffering a considerable temperature difference. It was very hot come race day, and the track, which was already unpopular with drivers and as it was to do in subsequent Grand Prix in Detroit, was largely broken up. Nelson Piquet took pole position again. Every driver who obtained pole position that year was given a free Vespa motor scooter. Piquet set the record that year for most motor scooters collected among F1 drivers. The start of the Detroit Grand Prix saw an accident between Piquet and Mansell which blocked much of the start-finish straight. This race had to be abandoned and restarted. Typical of Detroit, the race proved to be a race of severe attrition. Only 6 of the 26 cars finished. Nelson Piquet won again on a circuit where engine power was not as important as other things, and Martin Brundle compounded this with his naturally aspirated engine Tyrrell. Detroit was one of the few circuits where his underpowered car could actually finish in the points and be competitive. Thanks to the immediate power response of the naturally aspirated Ford Cosworth V8 DFY in the Tyrrell, compared to the delayed power response of the turbocharged engines, Brundle passed De Angelis in a Lotus for second, and was closing on Piquet on the last lap. The British driver finished 0.8 of a second behind the Brazilian. Soon after the podium ceremony, word arrived that the officials had found impurities in the water injection system on Brundle's Tyrrell 012 and lead balls in the rubber bag containing the water, so team boss Ken Tyrrell was called to a meeting of the FISA Executive Committee on July 18 and, based on the impurities in the water, which had been topped up during a pit stop, was accused of refueling the car during the race. FISA found the team guilty and Tyrrell was disqualified from the remainder of the World Championship and lost the 13 points they had already gained as of Detroit. The Formula One circus moved some 1,500 kilometers south to a whole new location in the United States for the Dallas Grand Prix at the Fair Park Circuit in Dallas, Texas. This race effectively replaced the United States Grand Prix West in Long Beach, California, which was held in April and was taken over by kart IndyCar racing. This race had already been controversial for being held in the intense 38 degrees Celsius average heat and humidity of a Texas July summer, and there were week-long rumors of its cancellation. Temperatures was too high as a typical Texas summer, and it was not only very slippery, but extremely bumpy as well. It was then decided to start the Grand Prix at 11 a.m. instead of the traditional time of 2 p.m. in an attempt to avoid the heat, which was scheduled to be 40 degrees Celsius that day. Nigel Mansell put his Lotus on pole position, the first of his career, with his teammate De Angelis alongside him in second. Martin Brundle yet again crashed severely and injured his ankles. He did not take part in the race. On race day, there was an American Trans Am support race that left the track with huge holes in the track scattered everywhere. Shelby and the organizers were able to briefly fix these holes barely 45 minutes after the race was due to start, with Prost and Lauda leading protests to cancel the race. As expected, the track broke up at the point that the cars had to line up behind each other even when right near each other to avoid the strewn gravel which if the cars got on top of, they would slip and slide and most likely crash at the tight and extremely demanding Fair Park circuit. Mansell held off several challenges from Warwick, who got onto the marbles and crashed into a tyre barrier, and also challenges from De Angelis, Prost, Lauda, and Rosberg. Piquet was also catching this group, and Arnoux, who had to start from the pit lane, passed several cars and was also closing on the leading group. Rosberg, who was running second, then forced Mansell into a mistake and took the lead. Mansell had to go into the pits because of problems with his car. Prost took the lead from Rosberg, but 8 laps later he clipped the wall and damaged his back right wheel. Rosberg, in his ill-handling Williams Honda, took advantage of Prost's mistake and repassed the Frenchman. Piquet hit the wall, and then retired due to a jammed accelerator pedal. There were consistent retirements throughout the entire race, with the air and track temperatures rising and the track getting even worse. Prost then retired due to a puncture, as did Michele Alboreto and Lauda. Rosberg, equipped with a skull cap that kept him cool, went on to win ahead of Arnoux and De Angelis. Only 7 of the 26 cars entered finished the race, one more finisher than Detroit. Mansell, 1 lap down in 6th place, suffered gearbox failure right before the finish, deciding to push his broken black Lotus across the line in the Dallas heat in his black overalls. While doing this, he collapsed and fainted due to exhaustion. He was given 6th place because the 7th and 8th place finishers were 2 laps behind Mansell. Formula One returned to Europe after the attrition-filled North American tour. The Brands Hatch circuit, just outside London in southeastern England, played host to this year's British Grand Prix, alternating with Silverstone every 2 years. In this race, Toleman driver and multiple motorcycle Grand Prix champion Johnny Cecotto crashed heavily at the fast Westfield corner, hitting the barriers there head-on. The Venezuelan broke both his legs and never raced in Formula One again. Piquet again qualified on pole position, with Prost and Lauda 2nd and 3rd. This race was run as 2 parts. The first race saw a massive accident at the bottom bend left-hand sweeping corner. Riccardo Patrese tried to pass Jack Lafitte's Williams Honda, but spun attempting to do so. This caused his teammate Eddie Cheever to lift off, and behind him Johansson did the same, but Philippe Alliot in the Ram Hart did not have time to react and went into the back of the Tyrrell and then flew over it, landing on the rear of Cheever's car. Also involved was Gardner, who tried to avoid the crash and ended up in the tyre barrier. The race went on, with Prost passing Piquet at the fearsome Paddock Hill bend, but this ended up not mattering because before the end of the lap, Jonathan Palmer had crashed the second Ram heavily at Clearways when the suspension failed. The car was parked beside the track, and it was then decided that if it was left there, it could become a launch pad if another car went off the circuit. The race was stopped, and this meant that at the restart Piquet was on pole again, as the order was based on the end of the 11th lap, much to the annoyance of Prost. After the race restarted, Prost retired with gearbox failure, Piquet pitted and lost a lap on the leaders. So victory went to Niki Lauda. Warwick finished 2nd and Ayrton Senna finished 3rd in the Toleman, which was better suited to faster tracks with long corners like Brands Hatch than it was to slow and tight circuits. The very fast Hockenheim circuit in West Germany, the longest circuit of the year, once again played host to the historic German Grand Prix. Surprisingly, at this power circuit, Prost qualified his McLaren on pole position, showing the benefits of a good car setup, and took the race victory ahead of Lauda and Warwick. Piquet retired yet again, this time with gearbox problems. The first part of the race saw a stirring drive from Senna. He was as high as 6th in his uncompetitive Toleman, but then his car's rear wing failed and he spun off near the Ostkov chicane. The Austrian Grand Prix, held at the Osterreitring at Zeltweg near Graz since 1970, played host to the 15th Austrian Grand Prix and the 400th Formula One Grand Prix. Pole sitter Piquet took the lead and led for most of the race distance. After the Renault engine in Elio de Angelis Lotus failed and littered the racing line at the very fast Johan Rindt curve with slippery oil, the leaders Piquet and Prost came through. Piquet slipped and slid slightly through the corner, but Prost, while trying to hold fourth gear in place, spun his car and crashed into the trackside Armco barrier. Lauda, who had passed third-placed Patrick Tambay coming out of the Bosch curve, moved up into second, and then began chasing Piquet. Lauda passed him going into the fastest corner on the track, the tire arc curve. Piquet dropped back with ruined tires, and Lauda slowed down a lot after losing fourth gear in the Texaco Panorama curves. Lauda was able to stay in front of Piquet and become the only Austrian to win his home Grand Prix. Italian Michele Alboreto in a Ferrari finished third. The spectacular beachside Zandvoort circuit, half an hour west of Amsterdam, was the traditionally long-time host of the Dutch Grand Prix. This race was a McLaren 1-2 with Prost winning in front of Lauda, with the Lotus duo Mansell and de Angelis finishing third and fourth, respectively. It was at this race where McLaren secured the manufacturers' championship. The result also saw that only de Angelis had a mathematical chance of beating either Lauda or Prost to the Drivers' Championship. The Italian Grand Prix took place in early September at the Monza Autodrome near Milan. This race saw Prost retire after an updated spec. Tag Porsche engine in his car failed early. Lauda, who was suffering the effects of a sore back, won from Italians Michele Alboreto and Riccardo Patrese, who inherited the third place when his teammate Eddie Cheever ran out of fuel in his Alfa Romeo. This would prove to be the last F1 podium achieved by Alfa Romeo. Nelson Piquet led early before retiring with engine failure, while teammate Teo Fobbi then led until he retired, also with a failed BMW engine. Patrick Tambay then took over the lead until he was passed by Lauda, with the Renault retiring shortly after. Swedish driver Stefan Johansson stepped in to drive the Toleman of Ayrton Senna for this race after Toleman has suspended the Brazilian when it became known that he had signed to drive for Lotus from 1985. Johansson drove a steady race and, capitalizing on the retirements of others, finished fourth, scoring his first World Championship points. Austrian drivers Joe Gartner and Gerhard Berger finished 5th and 6th for Osella and ATS respectively. However, as their teams had only entered one car for the season and both were in second cars entered for the race, neither received World Championship points. Grands Prix in the Queens neighborhood of New York City and in the beachside resort town of Fuengirola, Spain had been cancelled, which left a month-long gap between the Italian and a replacement Grand Prix, the European Grand Prix, this year held at the all-new Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit, with state-of-the-art safety facilities and paddock terraces. This new circuit replaced the old 22.8 km Nordschleife, which still exists today but in slightly shortened and bypassed form from the GP circuit. As the race went on, there was an accident at the start involving Senna and Rosberg. Both were out at the first corner, and Prost won this race unchallenged from Alboreto, pole sitter Piquet and Lauda, who qualified 15th. This meant that Prost's victory meant that he still stood a chance to win his first Drivers' Championship. Lauda led the points tally with 3.5 points. The first Portuguese Grand Prix since 1960 was held at the updated Estoril circuit near the Portuguese capital of Lisbon. McLaren had claimed the Constructors' Championship in Italy, after winning 11 of the 15 races in the season, including the last 6 Grands Prix. Prost qualified second alongside Piquet, who collected his 9th pole of the season, while Lauda was 11th on the grid. Lauda climbed up to third after passing Ayrton Senna, who had qualified third in a Toleman. Piquet had fallen away, so Prost was leading, with Nigel Mansell second in his last race for Lotus before moving to Williams. Mansell retired due to persistent brake problems, and Lauda moved up to second, ensuring his third World Championship. Prost won McLaren's 7th consecutive victory and 12th of 16 races, whilst Lauda finished second, a mere half point in front of Prost in the championship, a record margin that has not been matched since. Senna completed the podium. As of 1984, Prost had lost his 3rd consecutive F1 championship. He had been beaten by 2 points in 1983, and 7 points in 1982.